Hey, Unity Church, I'm so glad that I get to share with you again today. And today I'm going to be talking about the Beatitudes from the Bible. The Beatitudes are something that I actually spent a lot of time contemplating. I took the Beatitudes and actually took a couple years, and I went through each one and just kind of like made it real for myself, made the experience of each Beatitude real for myself. And I ended up writing a book about the Beatitudes, and even though it was never published, and this was like almost 10 years ago now, um, I thought I had lost the book, and just before I moved, I was borrowing my husband's computer, and he actually had a copy of the book saved on my computer. And then I have a publisher that I've been working with, and I don't know if I'm publishing through that company or another company, but I am absolutely confident that the book will actually be published someday, even though for many years I thought I had lost the copy of the book that I had typed up. So anyway, so I'm sharing about a book that's not published, and it's a book that I wrote related to my own experiences over a few years of actually really spending time going over the Beatitudes. I read several books about them, just spent a lot of time in the Beatitudes themselves. And what are Beatitudes? Okay, so the term Beatitude means a state of bliss or a state of happiness. Bliss in this context represents supernatural blessing that comes upon us. And so each of the Beatitudes start with blessed are ... and then it gives a quality, and it gives what the blessing is related to that quality. And I am going to focus mostly on the Beatitudes from the book of Matthew, but the Beatitudes also show up in the book of Thomas and in the book of Luke as well. And they're very similar in each one. Thomas has the fewest amount. Luke has, I believe, 5, and then Matthew has 8. The 8 from Matthew are the ones that I focused on the most. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful. I should know this because I spent a lot of time on it. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. And the first and the last in the book of Matthew have the same blessing. Those who are persecuted or misunderstood, I guess, is a better way of explaining it in modern times. And those who are poor have the same blessing. They achieve, or they experience the kingdom of heaven. That's the blessing that comes in. And so I actually, even when I first started, I really knew that the Beatitudes, particularly the 8 Beatitudes from Matthew, were just one process. They were associated with an evolutionary paradigm or an unfolding experience of heaven, because it starts out with heaven and it ends with heaven, and the first and last blessing are the same, meaning everything in between is actually a form of the same thing. They all represent what it is like to experience heaven. And I'll just start out with the first one, because the first one, I'm probably only going to get through 3, possibly 4, but maybe 3 in this video, mainly because I just know that it will take me more than 40 minutes to talk about all of the Beatitudes. So the first one is blessed are the poor, or poor in spirit in Matthew, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I will tell you, at the same time I was sort of working on these Beatitudes and meditating and focusing on them, the idea that the poor would be blessed was a big issue for me. And I spent a lot of times reading books that, pertaining to the Beatitudes, or sections of books that pertain to the Beatitudes, and I just couldn't find a satisfactory answer. And at the same time, I was studying New Thought and metaphysics. And in New Thought and metaphysics, it is not ideal to focus on poverty or being poor. And so it was sort of like a contradiction. And in particular, I was studying. My cat wants to be a part of this, apparently. Anyway, in particular, I was was studying Louise Hay, and she constantly had her students affirm that they received from an infinite source in an infinite way. Everything that they need is always provided for them, and really, really focused on abundance and having enough, and even things like saving. And she really focused on abundance, including monetary abundance as well, as being part of the universal good. Whereas Jesus is saying, blessed are the poor, or poor in spirit in Matthew, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I remember at first I kept thinking, one of these people is lying, and I'm pretty sure it's not Jesus, And so I really, I found it difficult really, engaging with this first beatitude. And I would say I probably spent several months, maybe even the first year, constantly going back to this first one, because I just couldn't figure it out. And some people would say, well, poor in spirit means to be prideful, or to be without pride, to be without arrogance. And I could see that to some degree, but I just didn't get that that's what Jesus was saying, or that's what the author of Matthew was saying in this. And other people would say, things like poor in spirit is about having no ego. And I just really didn't get that that's what was going on either, especially since it didn't make sense to be poor in spirit. I mean, it's positive to be rich in spirit. I mean, with the fruit of the Spirit, if we're rich in spirit, it means we have love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Those all seem like good qualities. So it didn't really make sense to me when it said be poor in spirit. And even the people that were using the original term spirit, it still didn't resonate with me very well. And so as I contemplated it, I started thinking maybe Jesus is saying something else. Maybe, especially with poor in spirit, because I knew it was not an ideal state for the spiritual seeker to be poor in spirit. And then I just realized, wait a minute, spirit in the Greek is breath. And that actually started making sense to me. Blessed are those who are poor in their breath, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now let me explain. We cannot store our breath. Every single one of us is poor in breath because we cannot have a reserve of air. Our breath is the most basic resource that we need in life. We could not go 5 minutes without taking the next breath. Yet we can't store it up. We can't, like with food or money or property, or we cannot have it in abundance. We can only take it the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. Yet, in life, it is absolutely the most precious resource that we have. And it will be provided for us for as long as we live. The next breath, and then the next breath, and then the next breath. And that started making a lot of sense to me, because when I recognize that the most precious resource that I have is provided for me in the moment that I need it, forever, for as long as I live, then I'm understanding where the abundance of this resource is coming from. It's coming from a source greater than myself. In fact, most of the time, I don't sit there and think, okay, now breathe in and breathe out. Okay, now breathe in and breathe out. I'm not sitting there doing that. And I have never been in a crowded room thinking, oh my goodness, I hope there's enough breath for me. I hope there's enough air in this room for all of us. That's never been an experience of mine either. Yet it is still the most important resource that I have to keep me alive. And I just trust constantly that the next breath is going to be there, because breath comes from a source greater than myself. It is a resource that is provided for me unconditionally. And it is a resource that is provided, and I would say provided to me from heaven, because I don't even have to focus on it. Something breathes me when I am not focused on my own breath. There's a power greater than myself, whether it's in my biology or whether it's in my physiology. Something is breathing me. And it is not my consciousness. And that's heaven. Heaven is the understanding that there is something greater than ourselves that is supporting us unconditionally in all ways. It's not just, okay, supporting us a little bit here and a little bit there, and then we have to make sure we save up enough money to get what we want, and we have to work really hard to get what we want. It's not like that. Everything that I need for this lifetime is provided for me from a source greater than myself. When I recognize that, I'm in heaven. When I don't recognize that, I'm not in heaven. And I've been in both places my entire life. And so this was the realization that I started getting. And I started realizing that, even though I read, especially in New Thought, I read a lot of people who were opposed to the idea of, seeing this as being poor is not a good idea. I don't get that that's what Jesus was communicating. In fact, if you consider, what is money anyway? What is, because a lot of people, when they think about prosperity and poverty, they think about money. Well, what is money? So in the United States, in the Federal Reserve, for every $1 that is printed, there are $10 that are loaned out. So the tangibility of money is only like 1 out of every 10 of those dollars. Only 10% actually has, only 10% of each dollar that has ever been printed, I don't know about ever been printed, but at least in recent times, has a tangible, I can hold on to this thing, part to it. And the rest is just stored in computers. It's not even like a real tangible thing, this idea of money. And it's just an idea. And so let's consider, gold. If I have maybe a safe full of gold, let's say I have 10 pounds of gold, which is, an enormous amount of gold. Who has more? The person who has that stored away, or the person who's connected to the one that created it? The people who have the ability to print money, to dispense money, they have more access to the money. But the thing is the tangibility of it is, in the value of it is what we put on it. And I've spent a lot of time in millionaire mastermind groups, and I've noticed that I have manifested $1 million one time, but it wasn't for myself, because I actually couldn't really determine how could I spend this for myself. I have a much broader understanding of the world at this point, but that was one of my first groups, and so I did manifest $1 million for another group. That, and it was very clear, it was very apparent through synchronicity. We could see, oh yeah, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and and we saw that they were able to build a whole new complex near my house at the time in Kansas City. Anyway, aside from that, we are connected to limitless resource. And a lot of times we get caught up in the idea that money is everything, that we just, if we just have enough money, then everything's going to be okay. And we focus all of our emotional attention on just needing enough money. And then we expend our life energy on just the fact that we need more money and have to pay this bill and have to pay this debt and have to pay this and that. And we really miss out on the reality that it's all already provided for us. And that the means for which it is provided doesn't come necessarily from our employer. It can, but it doesn't. That's not the real source of our abundance. The real source of our abundance is heaven. And we see this with the rich young ruler when Jesus met the rich young ruler. And, it tells us a few things. First of all, he was young, so he probably inherited all of his money. Second, he was, his power came from his wealth. It came from what he had inherited. And we see in that story in Matthew 19, I'm pretty sure it was Matthew 19, might have been 17. Anyway, I'm not going to look it up. It's one of those. But we see in that story that this rich young ruler had an emotional attachment to his money. And when Jesus, he asked Jesus, well, how do I do this? How do I evolve spiritually? And Jesus says, well, you have to follow all of the laws. And he said, well, which law is the most important? And Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself is the most important law. And then he says, what else do I need to do, Jesus? And Jesus says, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Then you will have the riches in heaven. And when the ruler heard this, the rich young ruler heard this, he was heartbroken. He realized, well, wait, I have a lot of land and I have a lot of power. And he was identified with the physical reality more than the heavenly reality, which is a limitation. That is a limitation. And Jesus went on to say that it's easier, or it's more difficult for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. He says it's very difficult for people to separate their idea of physical abundance from their understanding of limitless source. It does not matter how wealthy a person is. The infinite, compared to infinite source, they are poor. It doesn't matter how much someone has collected. Compared to infinite resources, they are in a state of poverty. Because to be able to count something means that there's a limitation. And to be pulling and drawing from infinite source, pulling and drawing, that is what heaven is. Heaven is, there is nothing that will limit you. There is no resource that I will withhold from you. That's what the Father is essentially saying through Jesus here. There's no resource that I will withhold from you to accomplish what you're meant to accomplish in this lifetime. And the other Beatitudes are all about, the next Beatitude, I sort of started explaining it with the rich young ruler. It's blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And that's the one thing that we do have to do, is we do have to separate ourselves from our false ideas about what life is and where our resources come from. And we have to understand, and sometimes we may even have to, if we're following the Spirit, we may even have to sell all we have and give it to the poor. Meaning that we have to separate ourselves from our identification with our physical objects and only trust that heaven will supply all of our needs. Now, the one thing that is important to understand too is in the next chapter in the Sermon on the Mount, which is where the Beatitudes are from, in Matthew 5. In Matthew 6, Jesus talks about seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you. And all of these things are all of the physical things. If you go back, he says, don't worry about what you'll eat. Don't worry about what you'll wear. You know, he talks about how he uses nature, and he talks about the birds and how they never, worry and toil for food, yet our Heavenly Father always feeds them. And the fields are clothed with flowers. And he says, not even King Solomon has been clothed as beautifully as these fields, showing that, it's not even that we, when we identify with physical things, it's not even that we are giving up anything big. We're not. We're actually, what he's saying, especially with the flowers of the field, is he's saying that, you can have way better than what you're willing to get through identifying with the physical limitation that you're seeing. With your, I don't really care what it is, with your investments or your portfolios or your savings. And I don't believe that Jesus was against those things either. I don't believe that that's what he was talking about. I do believe that he was talking about something like what Emmett Fox said. Emmett Fox has a quote on prosperity that, let's see if I can remember it. I may misquote it, but it's something like, prosperity and abundance is not how much you can collect. It is about how quickly and precisely your prayers are answered, meaning that it's not about how much, it's not about how much we have in the bank. If someone has, let's say, $1 million in the bank and someone has zero, and both people need $2 million to do some sort of project, let's say, just throwing it out there, the person with no money but a connection to heaven is far more into the flow of getting that project done than the person who is relying on the limited savings. And that's really what this is all about. And mourning is all about releasing it's about letting go of our physical identification. So blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And that's what the Spirit does for us. The Spirit is the great comforter. There's a process, and actually Unity gives it a really wonderful name. It was H. Emily Cady in Lessons in Truth called it chemicalization. When a new thought paradigm and an old belief meet. So let's say we're doing affirmations and about prosperity. We're saying things like, I receive from an unlimited source in an unlimited way. And we have, for let's say the past 20 years, invested in limitation, where we thought our jobs were everything. We thought our bank account was everything. And we had this very minimal viewpoint of what prosperity is. And again, this is not against collecting, it's not against saving. I don't believe that that's what Jesus was saying. It's about where we have our emotional identity. And when the limitless understanding meets with our limitation, there's often this chemicalization process because they're like opposites. And what happens is the new thought paradigm has to neutralize the old paradigm, and this can bring up all kinds of things, including physical manifestations and experiences based off of our limitations. But this particular beatitude is saying, listen, even if this happens, even as you're undoing these processes, these beliefs and limitations, even as you're undoing these things, you will be comforted. This is a temporary experience, and and it will be replaced with essentially the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, all of those things. I probably missed one there, but it doesn't matter. So that's what the blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And we can be confident that we will be comforted, that, we can be confident that these new paradigms are going to overshadow the old beliefs. Okay, so I want to explain that we are not losing anything. This mourning process, when we mourn over these false identifications, we are not in a state of loss. That's not what's going on. We're mourning over the false idea that money is our security, or that, some external thing is our provider. That's what we're really mourning over. We're mourning over the false idea. What we get in return is far greater than that's where the comfort comes from. It's far greater than what we're losing. We're not really even losing anything. We're losing a false idea. We're gaining infinite resource, but we still oftentimes have to process it, which is why chemicalization takes place. Or you can call it the dark night of the soul. Or I like what Robert Holden says. He says the soul cannot have a dark night. It is the dark night of the ego. The ego is the one this identification with externals that experiences the dark night, that experiences this sort of upheaval. And it is a real experience. I'm not diminishing. I've been through it a few times, so I would never diminish the person's experience of this, where they begin to stop identifying with, their bank accounts and begin to identify with the limitless resource of God. I'm not diminishing that's, that there is an actual real emotional consequence to that. There oftentimes is. Sometimes there isn't. Some people just seem to float right by it. This particular beatitude, and they just like, oh yeah, okay, so you mean I'm trading in a limitation for something that's unlimited? That's very easy. But there are people, and Jesus put this particular beatitude in there, there are people that will experience this emotional challenge of letting go, like the rich young ruler who had almost all of his identity in his, he was a ruler. He was a ruler of something, and his abundance, or the appearance of abundance, the physicality of his prosperity, gave him a sense of power. And when Jesus said, sell all you have and give it to the poor, he experienced an emotional consequence to that. And so I actually want to talk about, really briefly, I grabbed this book, it's by Florence Scovel Shinn, called The Game of Life and How to Play It. And she talks about this a little bit, and she talks about the law of substitution. And in her example, she's talking about a woman who really, really loved this one guy. I mean, she just thought he was the bee's knees. She just thought he was amazing. And when she realized that this man was not what she really desired, but that he was a symbol of her desires. So, let's call him Fred. I don't think the book even gives a name, but let's call him Fred. Let's say she really thought Fred was everything. But she realized that Fred only symbolized her desire for connection, her desire for communication, her desire for love, her desire for passion, her desire for physical intimacy. When she realized that and took ownership of the desire rather than the physical, what she thought was the physical manifestation, immediately another man came into her life and was actually the embodiment of what she truly desired. So I'm going to read two sections from this book. Florence Scovel Shinn talks about how we tend to strive for the externals and we ignore the internal patterns, the messages that we're getting from heaven about what we truly, our truest desires, our most authentic desires. And so she says, many people, however, are in ignorance of their true destinies and are striving for things and situations which do not belong to them and would only bring failure and dissatisfaction if attained. And so it's these things that we have to mourn. We have to mourn our false ideas of what we thought the world was going to be like. This is the only moment that's real. And this is where everything's happening, which means this is where I can find love. This is where I can find joy. And this is where I can find peace. And oftentimes we have to grieve the false ideas of where we thought we were going to be, what we thought we were going to do, and embrace where we're at so that we can begin to channel the higher purpose. And the higher purpose, so for me, when Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, it's not just about identifying with the physical, but it's also about how we tell our stories in life and what brings value in life. And I really believe that we all have a purpose on this planet, that we're not just here. Louise Hay used to say, you're not just here to buy a new car every few years and to buy a bit bigger and better house, that you actually have a purpose. And really, I get that that's what this is bringing to us. When we get into the evolution of these Beatitudes, we start seeing, blessed are the peacemakers. There's this, they should be called sons of God. We see a reconciliation quality to these things. But the first thing we actually have to deal with before we get into those things is, how are we relating to the world around us, and how are we relating to God? And is God just, a principle that we go to when we need a few extra dollars? Or is it the source through which we channel our life? Is it the experience that we channel that elevates everyone around us, that elevates our own experience and elevates everyone around us? And that's really what I believe Jesus is getting at with the Beatitudes, is that there is a higher purpose. There is a greater purpose. And that purpose, it's not just, and that's what I'm going to talk about in the law of substitution when I read this sentence in this book, is that this substitution that's coming is better than our own ability to conjure up a reality in our mind. And so she says, a right idea was substituted. And she's talking about, so this woman, found a man that actually promoted a relationship that fulfilled her desires. So I want to be careful, because it wasn't the man that was her desire anyway. It wasn't the man at first. It is the quality of experience that the heaven or the divine or God brought to her that fulfilled her deepest desires. So she says, a right idea was substituted for a wrong one. Therefore, there was no loss or sacrifice involved. And that's, again, what I want to get at with the blessed are those who mourn. It's not about mourning over loss. It's about mourning a loss of an idea that was never fulfilled anyway. It couldn't have been fulfilled because it wasn't a part of the divine matrix. It wasn't a part of the higher plan. And so it was just a conjured idea, whether through, identification with the media or with, all these externals. I mean, the media is a big one because a lot of people are talking about it these days, particularly related to politics. And I sort of take a neutral stand. I'm not neutral in my political values, but I sort of take a neutral viewpoint when it comes to, watching how people dialogue with each other in many ways, because I don't believe that there is such a thing as a political savior. And so I watch people fight over personalities, like, oh, this personality will fix things. No, this personality will fix things. And it's like, when I look at it, I go, wait a minute. First of all change is going to happen at the local level. It's going to happen within communities. That's how change happens. And there's no way, we can certainly make laws that, create a more equitable and meaningful society so people can self-actualize, which is one of my guiding principles when it comes to politics. But it's always interesting to watch sort of like this back and forth dialogue, almost as though the savior is something outside of ourselves, which it isn't. Heaven is our savior, God, the universe, the Christ within, this Holy Spirit. However you want, whatever term, the higher self, whatever term you want to put on it, that's where it's at. And and we're experiencing a lot of people are mourning over, when their political candidate doesn't win. It's a big deal. And we have to understand that we are the catalyst for change on the planet, each of us individually. And it's not that we are forced to change the planet. In fact, I don't believe any of us can change the planet. The goal is never to change the planet. The goal is to love. And love will change the planet because love is the force that does that. Okay, so I'm going to go into the third beatitude, and I think that this is going to be the one that I'm going to finish on. And it's, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And this is one that there's a lot of it's an interesting one, because if we look around, there's almost this is why the first two Beatitudes are so important, because there's almost the temptation to believe that force is how we inherit the earth, because we look around and we see, well, the people with the most guns tend to have the most power and inherit the earth. But I don't believe that that's true. I just don't believe that that's historically true. So if you look at the history of the world and the people that have had the most influence, people like Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus, Buddha. These were all people that embodied meekness and lived a life from meekness, lived a life from meekness is like power under control, meaning they knew what supported them. There's stories of Mother Teresa that, she knew where her resources come from. And there's controversy over Mother Teresa, but none of us are perfect. So, but, Martin Luther King, he knew he was going to die, but he knew the power that was motivating this cause, that was motivating him to say what he was saying and do what he was doing. And that's where we understand that the people who are meek do inherit do inherit the earth. Look at how, look at how big the religion of Jesus has gotten simply based off of his choice of being meek. I don't believe that the predominant representation of the religion of Jesus is not a meek religion. However, it is because Jesus embodied meekness that the message has been carried forth over and over again, and he has inherited the earth. I like what Charles Fillmore in The Revealing Word, I like his definition of meekness as well. He says, anyone highly trained to react to all negative stimuli with love instead of with an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So anyway, so that's meekness. Meekness to Charles Fillmore was the embodiment of love within physical situations. And this is why the first two Beatitudes are so important. The first two Beatitudes, first of all, when we begin to channel from heaven, we begin to channel from infinite resource, meaning that there is nothing that is impossible for us. There's nothing, with God, all things are possible, essentially. And the second one is our ability to self-identify with heaven rather than with physical circumstances. And this produces meekness. Without the ability to identify only with heaven and allow heaven to be our resource, we can't really be meek, because meekness is first recognizing our power and then using our power in a way that benefits every person on the planet, every person that we come in contact with. That's what meekness is. And that's how we inherit the earth, is we inherit the earth through every person that we touch, every life that is changed as a result of us being here. I want to tell a story just, briefly about an experience that I had of this. And the one thing about this principle, or this, this experience, is that a lot of times we don't know the impact that we're having in any given situation. And so I was volunteering at a homeless shelter, and one year there was a shelter that I was volunteering at, and they lacked a lot of overnight volunteers. They just didn't have anyone to be there, which is common for shelters, but I ended up volunteering 30 to 50 hours a week for several weeks on end. And I was supposed to be writing down in a little journal that they had about what the events of the night. And the first night that I volunteered there, I opened it up and I looked at it, and there was somebody on there, that one of the residents that I really liked, and one of the other volunteers was saying something very nasty about this person. And so even though I was supposed to be reading this journal of events every night, I decided I wasn't going to do that, because I did not want my vision of this person or anyone else within the situation to be changed based off of another person's judgment. And so I wrote in the book every morning when I left, but I never read what happened the night before. And one night I had a gentleman that came up to me, and he was crying, and he was very emotional. And he said, "Thank you. I know what you do. Thank you. It's different when you're here." He says, "The police are never called, and there's never any violence." And I thought that was a very strange thing to say. So and this was after I believe it was a couple months that I had been volunteering almost full time. And so I went through and I started reading the nights that I was not there, because the nights that I was there, everything went well. It was a peaceful night. Everyone got along, whatever. But the nights that I wasn't there, almost every night there was an act of violence. Almost every night there was a some sort of upheaval. The police were called numerous times when I wasn't there. Almost every time that I wasn't there, the police were called. And the only thing different this permanent resident there recognized the only thing that was different was I was there on the nights when it was peaceful, and I wasn't there on the nights when it wasn't. And what I had been doing was I used Ho'oponopono. It is a 4-line prayer saying, "I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you." And anytime I noticed, let's say there were two people that were getting a little heated, anytime I would notice, I would focus the prayer on to that situation. In fact, I would just normally use Ho'oponopono throughout the night. "I love you, thank you, I love you, thank you." And then when I saw something out of order, I would start saying, "Please forgive me, thank you." Meekness itself can manifest without us even knowing. When we're in a state of peace, we influence the world around us, whether we're aware of it or not. And a lot of times I don't believe that I believe by grace that this was made aware to me, that this was brought to my attention, this person just, came up to me and started telling me, and I read through the book, and I'm like, wow, there is definitely something to this, identification with a power greater than ourselves. And I think that's the whole thing. That's really what Jesus was trying to teach all of us, is that we are connected to a power that is greater than ourselves. And Louise used to say, do you know that you're connected to a power greater than yourself? Because if you don't, no wonder why you're frightened. I would be frightened too if I thought I had to run the world all by myself. And that's it. When we identify with heaven more than we identify with our observations, then we come into alignment with a greater truth, a capital T truth. We begin to be the channels of that greater experience. And yes, it benefits us, but it also benefits everyone around us as well. We are, and that's why I think it's important that, I don't know if you've ever tried to change somebody, but I don't believe that we are meant to try to change other people or circumstances. If you've ever tried, you know how fruitless that can be, because the more we try, and actually, thankfully, I gave up on trying to change other people a long time ago, and I realized that I can only change myself, and I can accept people, and I can spend as much time with them as I want to, or I can, withdraw, but I do not try to change anyone, because we don't have the power to change anyone. And really, it's only through an identification and a dedication to love, joy, and peace that we can really change ourselves. But we don't have to force change on other people, but we can definitely be the change agent within circumstances that we're in. And the last thing I want to talk about just really quickly, because it sort of embodies these three, are love and joy and peace. These are the first three fruit of the Spirit, and the Spirit is heaven. When we're engaged with the Spirit, we are in a state of heaven. So the first one, love. To me, love is unconditionally accepting and approving and uplifting myself and others. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think a lot of people miss the second half of that statement. They just, they'll believe that, if I just suffer and struggle and love this person, that something will happen. I believe we're all already following, this law. It's just a lot of people do try to love their neighbors, but they don't really care too much for themselves. And so focusing on loving and approving and accepting ourselves first, and seeing ourselves through the lens of the Spirit, seeing the part of ourselves that is the Christ, that is the Christ within, our hope of glory, and recognizing that part of ourselves, and then blessing ourselves, and then blessing others. So first of all, love. Love is unconditionally accepting, approving, and blessing others. Joy. A lot of people try to search for happiness, and joy does bring happiness, but joy is much greater than happiness, and joy is a manifestation of love. Joy is when we are authentically ourselves in the moment without fear of judgment and criticism. That's really what joy is, when we do not feel any sort of constraint on who we authentically are, and we can just be ourselves wherever we are. That's joy. And peace is trust. Peace comes from the absence of worry and fear. When we're in a state of peace, where we just know that everything is working out for our highest good and the highest good of everyone around us. And those three things are what I believe are the main qualities of heaven, that when we recognize, blessed are the poor, or poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When we begin to recognize that at greater and greater levels in ourselves, that's when we begin to experience love, joy, and peace in greater ways. So just to summarize, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These are opposites. The poor and heaven are opposites. When we recognize the poverty of the richest man in the world, because his resource is limited and heaven is limitless, that's when we are able to channel from a higher source for highest purpose. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted, is when we stop identifying with the external and we start identifying with our highest self. And blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, means when I recognize that all is love, that's what I experience. And that's it. I'm going to close with a short little message from Louise Hay, but I am going to grab the book. Okay, so I'm reading from Meditations to Heal Your Life, and it's by Louise Hay. And I actually picked the one about patience because the one thing about the Beatitudes is I've never met anyone that got all of this all at one time, including myself. I mean, I'm still in process as well, as we all are. And so I picked the one about patience, and she starts out with the affirmation, all is well. I have everything I need now. I have plenty of time. When I am impatient, I know it is because I do not want to take the time to learn the lesson at hand. I want it all done now. Or as I once heard, instant gratification is not soon enough. There is always something to learn, something to know. Patience and being at peace with the process of life, knowing that everything happens in the perfect time-space sequence. If I am not having completion now, then there is something more for me to know or to do. Being impatient does not speed up the process. It only wastes time. So I breathe, I go within and ask, what is it I need to know? Then I patiently wait to receive the help that is all around me. So those were the first 3 Beatitudes. There are 5 more, and I will be doing those 5 more on December 27th. And I'll just be going through the rest of them. I just want to say happy holidays. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you again on the 27th. Many blessings to you. Mwah. Bye.